He was a billionaire, a titan of industry, a man who could buy cities. She was a waitress he'd discarded, and in her arms were the 2 children he swore weren't his. In a packed courtroom, Julian Blackwood laughed as his lawyers painted Elena Rodriguez as a desperate, lying gold digger. He even produced medical documents proving he was sterile. But he forgot one thing. A lie is only as strong as the secrets it hides. And when the judge finally unsealed a set of hidden documents, the billion-dollar empire, the perfect lie, and the man himself all came crashing down. Elena Rodriguez checked her watch, a cheap plastic one with a cracked face. 5:17 p.m. The evening rush at the corner bistro was about to begin. Her feet already ached in her worn-out sneakers, a dull throb that mirrored the ache in her bank account. She juggled 3 plates of pasta, smiling at the patrons, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. This wasn't her life. This was the costume she wore to survive. Her real life was in a cramped, 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, a life filled with the smell of baby powder, the sound of 2 identical giggles, and the constant, crushing anxiety of impending bills. Her real life was Leo and Maya, her twins. 4 years ago, Elena hadn't been a waitress. She'd been a promising artist, a scholarship student at NYU, invited to cater a high-end charity gala at the Met. That's where she met him, Julian Blackwood. He wasn't just rich, he was the kind of wealthy that exists only in movies. His family's name, Blackwood Properties, was etched onto half the skyscrapers in Manhattan. He had been magnetic, his eyes a cold, startling blue. He hadn't looked at her like a waitress. He'd looked at her like a discovery. What followed was a 3-month whirlwind that felt stolen from a fairy tale. Helicopter rides to the Hamptons, private viewings at Sotheby's, dinners where the wine cost more than her rent. Elena, smart and grounded, knew it was a fantasy. She never mistook it for forever. But she was human, and she fell. He was charming, attentive, and for a moment, she believed his world could be hers. Then came the 2 pink lines. She had rehearsed the conversation. She wasn't asking for a ring. She was just telling him. She found him in his penthouse study, overlooking Central Park. He didn't yell, he didn't argue, he just chilled. The warmth she'd come to know vanished, replaced by an Arctic frost. "That's impossible," he said, adjusting his $10,000 watch. "Julian, it's ours. It's yours, Elena. I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm not the one." "Game? This isn't a game." "Here's what will happen," he said, standing, his voice devoid of all emotion. "My driver will take you home. You will take care of this problem, and my assistant will send you a check for your discretion." He offered her $50,000. Not for a child, for an inconvenience. Elena stared at him, the man she thought she knew, and saw a monster. She didn't say a word. She didn't cry. She simply turned, walked out of the penthouse, and never looked back. She refused the check, blocked his number, and vanished from his world. She had her twins, moved to a different borough, and traded her paintbrushes for serving trays. For 3.5 years, she did it alone. She was proud, and she was terrified. The terror peaked 3 months ago. Maya, her little girl, had a persistent cough, a wheezing that terrified Elena in the dead of night. A specialist at the public clinic diagnosed her with a severe asthmatic condition, one that would require expensive medication and regular therapy. A week later, Leo, always the stoic one, fell at the playground and broke his arm. The hospital bill was catastrophic. Her pride couldn't buy an inhaler. Her dignity couldn't set a bone. For the first time in 4 years, Elena Rodriguez made a call. Not to Julian, but to the Legal Aid Society. The fight wasn't about her anymore. It was about them. She was suing Julian Blackwood for paternity and child support. The world she had run from was about to find her. The response wasn't a phone call. It was an avalanche. 2 days after the legal notice was served, a man visited the corner bistro. He didn't order. He waited until Elena's shift was over. He was tall, thin, and wore a suit so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, his voice a smooth, reptilian hiss. He handed her a card. "Marcus Thorne, Escobedo Senior Partner, Blackwood Legal. I'm here to deliver a message from Mr. Blackwood." They stood on the rain-slicked sidewalk, the smell of garbage and gourmet pasta mixing in the air. "He's prepared to offer you a one-time payment of $100,000, Thorne said, in exchange for a full, binding and permanent non-disclosure agreement and your immediate withdrawal of this fictitious claim." Elena clutched her worn bag. "It's not fictitious." Thorne smiled, a bloodless expression. "Ms. Rodriguez, I have a file on my desk 3 inches thick about you. I know you were on scholarship. I know you have 40 tudlas in your checking account. I know about the hospital bill. You are a desperate woman. The court will see that." "They're his children," Elena said, her voice shaking but firm. "They are inconvenient," Thorne corrected. "And Mr. Blackwood does not do inconvenient. Take the offer. Buy your son a better cast, because if you proceed, I will not just defeat you in court. I will end you. I will paint you as a harlot, a schemer, a delusional gold digger. By the time I am done, you won't be able to get a job waitressing at a hot dog stand." Think about that. He didn't wait for a reply. He simply slid into the back of a black Mercedes S-Class that had been idling at the curb and disappeared. Elena went home and was sick, but Marcus Thorne was a man of his word. The smear campaign began the next day. It started with page 6 in the New York Post. A small, snarky item. "Which Big Apple billionaire is being targeted by a former fling with a sudden case of miracle twins? We hear she's a struggling artist looking for a masterpiece of a payday." Then the blogs picked it up. Photos of Elena, taken from her old art school Instagram, were juxtaposed with headlines. "The Blackwood Schemer. Inside Elena Rodriguez's plot to trap a billionaire. Bistro Brunette's baby daddy. Lie exposed." Her boss at the bistro, a kind man named Sal, had to let her go. "The reporters, Elena. They're harassing the customers. The phone won't stop ringing. I'm sorry." She was fired. Her neighbors looked at her with suspicion. Her landlord posted an eviction warning on her door for being 3 days late with rent. This was the Blackwood machine. It didn't just fight. It annihilated. Her own lawyer, David Chen from Legal Aid, was a young, earnest man who looked permanently exhausted. "They're trying to break you, Elena," he said, sifting through the stack of cease and desist letters Thorne's office sent daily. "They want you to be so tired, so poor, and so scared that you give up before we even see a judge." "David," she whispered, holding a sleeping Maya, who was wheezing softly. "What if they're right? What if I can't win?" David looked at the twins, then back at her. "The truth is the truth, Elena. They can't change that. They've requested an immediate hearing. They want this over fast. We just have to hold on until we get in that courtroom." The day of the hearing arrived. The family courthouse in downtown Manhattan was a circus. Reporters and photographers swarmed the entrance, shouting Eleanor's name. She was flanked by David Chen, who looked like a high school student fending off a rugby team. Eleanor kept her head down, her coat, her only coat, stained with what she hoped was just applesauce from Leo's breakfast. She looked poor. She looked scared. She looked exactly like the gold digger they'd painted her to be. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Julian Blackwood arrived last, like a king granting an audience. He wore a navy blue Tom Ford suit. He was flanked by Marcus Thorne and a team of 4 other lawyers. He looked calm, polished, and faintly annoyed, as if a fly had interrupted his lunch. He did not look at her. Not once. The judge, Serafina Hayes, was a woman in her late 50s, with a reputation for suffering no fools. Her gaze was sharp as she surveyed the room. "Mr. Thorne, you're the one who requested this emergency hearing. The floor is yours." Marcus Thorne rose, smooth as silk. "Your Honor, this is a tragedy of greed. My client, Mr. Julian Blackwood, is a pillar of this community, a philanthropist, a job creator, and like many prominent men, he is a target." He gestured to Eleanor. "Ms. Elena Rodriguez has concocted a fantasy, a desperate attempt to extort a man she had a brief and regrettable acquaintance with 4 years ago. She has brought no proof, no photographs, no emails, no texts, nothing." Elena's stomach tightened. It was true. Julian had been careful. He never texted. He always called. The photos they'd taken were on a phone he'd gifted her, which he'd remotely wiped the day he dumped her. "We are here," Thorne continued, "to put an end to this harassment, and to prove definitively that this claim is not just false, but a biological impossibility." This was new. David Chen shot Eleanor a confused look. "Mr. Blackwood," Thorne said, "will you please take the stand?" Julian moved with languid grace. He swore the oath. "Mr. Blackwood," Thorne began, "did you have a relationship with Ms. Rodriguez?" "I would not call it a relationship," Julian said, his voice resonating with false sincerity. "I knew her, briefly. I was a patron of her art, you could say. I tried to help her." "And did you sleep with her?" "Yes. On one occasion. It was a mistake I regret." One occasion. Eleanor's nails dug into her palms. It had been 3 months. "And could you be the father of her children?" Julian sighed, the picture of a burdened saint. "No, Mr. Thorne, I could not." "Why are you so certain?" "Because, Your Honor," Julian said, turning his magnetic blue eyes on Judge Hayes. "It is a medical fact. I am unable to have children." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. "It is not something a man admits lightly," Julian said, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. "I've known for years, a condition I was born with. I have spent a fortune trying to correct it, to no avail. I had planned to tell my future wife, when the time was right. I suppose Miss Rodriguez has forced my hand." He looked at Eleanor, his first acknowledgement of her. It wasn't anger. It was pity. The look of a kind man forgiving a pathetic, delusional liar. It was a masterful performance. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. Even she, for a split second, almost believed him. "This is a lie," she hissed to David. "He's under oath," David whispered back, his face pale. "He wouldn't dare." "Mr. Thorne," Judge Hayes said, her face unreadable. "You have proof of this condition?" "We do, Your Honor," Thorne said, picking up a sleek, leather-bound file. "A complete medical file, sworn affidavits from the world's leading fertility specialists. He was going to do it. He was going to use a mountain of lies to bury her, and she had nothing but the truth." "The defense," Marcus Thorne announced, "calls Dr. Armand Dubois to the stand." A distinguished grey-haired man was sworn in. He was, Thorne explained, the head of the prestigious Clinique La Vigne in Switzerland, a private clinic for the world's elite. Dr. Dubois testified, in a soft, clinical accent, that Mr. Blackwood had been his patient for 5 years. He proceeded to use a barrage of complex medical terms: severe oligozoospermia, chromosomal abnormalities, failed micro-TC procedures. The bottom line was simple. Julian Blackwood's chances of siring a child naturally were not just low, Your Honor. They are statistically 0. Then Thorne produced the file. It was thick. It contained lab reports, surgical summaries, and expert opinions, all on the clinic's heavy, embossed letterhead. It was the most comprehensive, detailed, and expensive lie Elena had ever seen. David Chen did his best on cross-examination. Dr. Dubois, you are paid by Mr. Blackwood? My clinic is? Yes. And he is a very generous donor to your research wing, is he not? He is a patron of science, yes. So your testimony is biased. My testimony, the doctor said, offended, is based on medical fact. Science does not lie, Mr. Chen. When it was Eleanor's turn, Thorne was brutal. Ms. Rodriguez, you claim you were in a 3-month relationship, yet you have not one single text message, one email, one photo. Is that correct? He was very private. He had them deleted. Convenient. You claim he met your family? Your friends? No, it was separate from my life. Another convenient fact. You claim to be a struggling artist, yet you waitressed. You claim to be a devoted mother, yet you're dragging your children's names through the mud for a payday. Objection, David yelled. Counsel is badgering. I'll rephrase, Thorne sneered. Ms. Rodriguez, how many other wealthy men have you accused of fathering your children? Objection. Sustained, Judge Hayes said, her voice sharp. Move on, Mr. Thorne. But the damage was done. By the time Thorne was finished, Elena was a sobbing, humiliated wreck. She had no proof. He had a Swiss doctor and a mountain of evidence. The media outside the courtroom had their verdict. Blackwood's sterile bombshell, blared the first online reports. Courtroom drama. Gold digger's case collapses. Julian Blackwood left the courtroom looking sympathetic and wounded. That evening, in David Chen's tiny, cluttered office, Elena was ready to give up. He won, David. He has a Swiss doctor. I have nothing. I don't believe it, David said, pacing. He was staring at a copy of the Swiss report. What's not to believe? It's too perfect. It's too clean. He tapped the summary page. Dr. Dubois, I'm going to look into this guy. And this clinic. What's the point? He'll just buy them off. Maybe. But Elena, David said, his eyes intense. He's lying. You know it. I know it. But he made a mistake. What mistake? He lied too big, David said. A man this arrogant, he doesn't just tell a lie. He builds a cathedral to it. And cathedrals have flaws. David's phone buzzed. He looked at it. It's a motion from Thorne. He's requesting the case be dismissed with prejudice. Meaning you can never bring this case again. Ever. Oh, God. We have 48 hours to respond, David said, his jaw set. He thinks he's buried us. He just gave us a shovel. I'm going to petition the judge for one thing. The only thing that matters. What? A court-ordered, independently administered DNA test. Thorne's team fought it, tooth and nail. Harassment, redundant. The medical files prove it's unnecessary. But Judge Hayes, in her wisdom, saw through the bluster. Mr. Thorne, you've presented a formidable case for your client's infertility, she said in the chamber. If that is the case, then a new DNA test will only serve to confirm your position and permanently clear Mr. Blackwood's name. It's a simple swab, Counselor. What could you possibly be afraid of? Thorne was cornered. The motion was granted. Julian Blackwood, Marcus Thorne, Elena Rodriguez, and David Chen were ordered to appear at an independent testing facility, New York Presbyterian Hospital, the next day. Julian's mask of cool indifference finally cracked. For a single second, as the judge gave the order, Elena saw it. Panic. The DNA test was a sterile, tense affair. Julian Blackwood showed up an hour late, fuming. He barely looked at the twins, Leo and Maya, who were scared and confused by the men in white coats. A court-appointed monitor watched as the swabs were taken from Julian, then from Leo, then from Maya. The samples were sealed, labeled, and sent to the lab. "The results will be delivered directly to my chambers in 72 hours, Judge Hayes had declared. Until then, this court is in recess. Julian and his team stormed out, but David Chen wasn't celebrating. "That Swiss report is still the problem, Elena," he said. "Even if the DNA test is a match, Thorne will just argue the test was contaminated, or that his medical condition makes the match a 1 in a billion fluke that doesn't mean paternity." "He's a snake, David." "We need to cut the head off," David said. "We have to prove the Swiss report itself is a fraud." David spent the next 48 hours living on caffeine and adrenaline. He cross-referenced Dr. Dubois' published papers. He checked flight manifests. He dug into the Clinique Lavigne's corporate filings. And he found the flaw. The clinic was real, but its infertility wing had been established only 6 months prior, funded entirely by a generous anonymous grant. He found an article in a Swiss paper with a photo. Dr. Dubois accepting a large check, the man handing it to him. Not Julian. It was Marcus Thorne. But that wasn't the flaw. He found a society blog from London, a Polo for Purpose charity match. There was Julian on a horse, mallet raised, smiling for the camera. The date stamp on the photo. It was the exact same day Dr. Dubois' report claimed Julian was in Switzerland, undergoing a painful diagnostic procedure. "He wasn't there," David whispered, his office lit only by his monitor. "He wasn't in Switzerland. He bought the report from here." His phone rang. It was an unlisted number. "Is this David Chen?" a woman's voice asked. It was older, shaky, but clear. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Margaret Gable," the voice said. I used to work for the Blackwood family, for Julian's father, for 30 years. David sat up straight. "Mrs. Gable? I was his executive assistant. When the old man passed, Julian, he restructured. He called me legacy baggage and had security walk me out. 30 years, and he gave me a cardboard box." "I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Gable." "Oh, don't be sorry, Mr. Chen. Be smart. I read about the trial, about that Swiss doctor. Julian is lying." "How do you know?" "Because I handled all of Mr. Blackwood Sr.'s affairs, and Julian's, including his medicals, for insurance, for travel. Julian is no more sterile than a rabbit. He's a Blackwood. The old man was obsessed with his legacy and his lineage. He had Julian tested every year." David was scribbling notes. "Mrs. Gable, would you be willing to testify?" There was a long pause. "Testify, and have Marcus Thorne's men hunt me. No, I'm an old woman. I just want to live in peace. But I kept things. Insurance, a just-in-case file for my own protection." "What things?" "The Blackwood Properties mainframe. I still had access for a week after they fired me. They're so arrogant, they didn't even change the passwords right away. I took copies of Julian's everything, his real medicals, his trust documents. I'm in a diner, the Apollo on 86th. You have 20 minutes. The line clicked dead." David grabbed his coat. This was it. This was the head of the snake. Mrs. Gable was a small, neat woman with terrified eyes. She slid a thick manila envelope across the sticky diner table. "I never did this," she said. "You're doing the right thing," David said, his hand closing over it. "Julian isn't just a liar," she said, her voice low. "He's cruel. His father was a difficult man, but he had a code. Julian, he's just empty." She stood up, pulling her scarf tight. Make him pay. David didn't open the envelope until he was back in his locked office. He spread the contents on his desk. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was an arsenal. Document 1. Julian Blackwood's actual medical file from his family's longtime physician at New York Presbyterian. The file showed Julian was in perfect health. In fact, a note from 2023, just a year before, confirmed his excellent vitality. Document 2. A series of internal emails between Julian Blackwood and Marcus Thorne. Julian: this is a disaster. She's suing. Fix it. Thorne: we will make her an offer. If she refuses, we will move to the Swiss solution. Julian: it's expensive. Thorne: it's cheaper than the alternative. I'll have the funds wired to Dubois and the file created. You just need to be sick for a week. It was, in black and white, a conspiracy to commit perjury and fabricate evidence. Document 3. This one made David's blood run cold. It wasn't a medical file, it was a business document, a 200-page draft merger agreement. It was between Blackwood Properties and Harrington Logistics, a global shipping empire run by the equally powerful Arthur Harrington. David skipped to the signatory page. The merger was contingent on one thing: the marriage of Julian Blackwood to Victoria Harrington, Arthur's only daughter. David had seen Victoria in the press. She was a beautiful, ice-blonde heiress, and she had been sitting in the front row of the courtroom, right behind Julian, looking at Elena with utter disdain. Their engagement had been announced 2 months ago. This wasn't a marriage. It was a $10 billion corporate merger. David scanned the annexes, and there it was. Section 4.b, the Family Values and Morality Clause. The clause stated that the merger would be rendered null and void if either primary signatory, Julian or Victoria, was found to have engaged in conduct that would bring moral or financial scandal upon the new entity. It specifically listed the revelation of unacknowledged heirs, or any public paternity or palimony suit, as grounds for immediate termination of the deal. Julian wasn't just denying Elena to save face, he was denying his children to save his empire. If he acknowledged Leo and Maya, the $10 billion Harrington deal would instantly vaporize. "Oh my God," David whispered. "He's not just a liar. He's a monster." He looked at the clock. The court reconvened in 8 hours. The day the court reconvened was a spectacle of a different kind. The sterile billionaire bombshell had turned the media's hunger into a ravenous, frantic need. The air was electric, not just with anticipation, but with a palpable bloodlust. Julian Blackwood, the Titan, was wounded. The sharks were circling. Elena Rodriguez felt like a ghost walking into her own execution, or perhaps her resurrection. She couldn't tell which. David Chen, his cheap suit freshly pressed, held her arm. His hand wasn't steady, but his eyes were. He was carrying a worn, battered briefcase, and inside it, the manila envelope from Margaret Gable felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "It's going to be okay, Elena," he whispered, as the first camera flash exploded in her face, a blinding white light that made her flinch. "They all look so hungry," she whispered back, shrinking against him. "They're not here for you anymore," David said, his voice grim. "They're here for him." Julian Blackwood's arrival was, as always, a performance. He and his legal team, led by Marcus Thorne, swept in through a private entrance, bypassing the main circus. But they couldn't bypass the courtroom. Julian wore a suit of charcoal grey, a colour of mourning, perhaps, or of quiet authority. He looked serious, burdened, but resolute. And he wasn't alone. On his arm, a deliberate, calculated accessory, was Victoria Harrington. She was a vision in a white Chanel suit, her ice-blonde hair pulled back. She looked every bit the supportive, unshakable fiancé. Beside her sat her father, Arthur Harrington, a man who looked like he was carved from granite and old money. They were here as a statement. The Harrington-Blackwood alliance was unbreakable. This was a mere nuisance. Julian sat at the defendant's table. He gave Victoria's hand a reassuring squeeze. He looked at his lawyers. He nodded. He was Julian Blackwood. He would not be beaten. He refused to even look at Elena, to grant her the dignity of his gaze. All rise. Judge Seraphina Hayes entered, and the room fell into a tomb-like silence. She took her seat, her face a mask of judicial neutrality. She looked over the packed gallery, her eyes lingering for a split second on the Harringtons. Then she looked at the two tables. This court is in session. The matter before us is Case 945B, Rodriguez versus Blackwood. After the surprising testimony at our last hearing, this court ordered a mandatory, independently administered DNA test. The results from that test, conducted at New York Presbyterian Hospital and monitored by representatives from both sides, have been delivered directly to my chambers. She held up a single, sealed white envelope. In that moment, Elena's heart stopped. This was it. Everything, her life, her children's future, the truth, was in that envelope. Julian watched it, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. This was a formality. A messy, inconvenient formality. Thorne had already prepped him. The Swiss report, a medical certainty, would always outweigh a single, statistically fluke-ridden, contaminated test. Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Rodriguez, please rise. Elena stood, her knees locking. She felt David's hand on the small of her back, a silent, "I'm here." Julian rose with a sigh, a man being put upon by a tedious, emotional process. Judge Hayes picked up a letter opener. The snick of the paper tearing was the loudest sound in the room. She pulled out a single folded sheet, opened it, and put on her reading glasses. The silence stretched. 1 second. 5. 10. She read it, her face betraying nothing. She read it a second time. Elena thought she was going to be sick. "Please, please, please," she whispered, a prayer so quiet it was only a breath. Julian, across the room, began to feel the first, cold prickle of something. Not fear. Not yet. But impatience. Why was she taking so long? Finally, Judge Hayes looked up. She removed her glasses. "The findings," she said, her voice clear and cutting, "are conclusive. The testing facility reports no anomalies, no contamination, and a perfect chain of custody." She looked directly at Julian Blackwood. "The probability of paternity for Mr. Julian Blackwood is 99.99999% for the minor child, Leo Rodriguez." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. "And," the judge continued, her voice rising, 99.99999% for the minor child, Maya Rodriguez. It was a bomb. The press gallery erupted. A reporter yelled, "Oh my God!" Victoria Harrington's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth, her eyes, wide with shock, fixed on Julian. "Julian," she whispered. Elena crumpled. Her legs gave out, and she sank into her chair, a strangled sob tearing from her throat. It wasn't joy. It was the sound of 4 years of terror, shame, and exhaustion finally breaking free. "Order!" The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Order!" Julian Blackwood was frozen. His face was a mask of white marble. He turned, slowly, to Marcus Thorne. His look was not one of panic. It was one of pure, incandescent rage. "Fix this!" he hissed, his voice low and lethal. Marcus Thorne, for the first time, looked rattled. But he was a shark. He lived for blood in the water. He'd leaped to his feet. "Objection. Your Honor, this is an outrage. A clear and patent impossibility. The test is flawed. The chain of custody must have been broken. It is contaminated. It's a statistical anomaly." He was shouting now, his face red, pointing at the judge's desk. "We have definitive medical proof from the world's leading expert that my client is sterile. That fact renders this test, this piece of paper, inadmissible. It's a fraud. We demand a retest. We demand a full hearing on New York Presbyterian's lab protocols. This is Mr. Thorne." The judge's voice was not a shout. It was a shard of ice. So cold, so sharp, it cut through Thorne's tirade and stopped him mid-syllable. "You," she said, "will sit down. Now." Thorne, his mouth still open, slowly, very slowly, sat. "You are not objecting, Mr. Thorne. You are having a tantrum, and you are doing so in my courtroom. This test was not a suggestion. It was an order. It was conducted at one of the finest medical institutions on the planet. Your claim of contamination is insulting, both to this court and to the medical profession at large." She leaned forward. "The DNA is a match, Mr. Thorne. That is now a fact in this record, a fact which stands in direct, glaring contradiction to the performance your client and his Swiss doctor gave." She turned her gaze on Julian. "Mr. Blackwood, it seems you have a great deal of explaining to do. You are either a medical miracle, or you are a liar." Julian's mind was racing, the cogs grinding. The Swiss report, the Swiss report. The DNA is a fluke. The report is fact, a court-ordered test versus a lifetime of medical data. The data wins. Thorne can spin this. He has to spin this. He was about to whisper to Thorne to pivot to the 1-in-a-billion anomaly defense when another voice cut through the silence. "Your Honor?" David Chen stood, his voice shaky but clear. "Given Mr. Thorne's energetic defense of his client's condition, the plaintiff believes this might be the opportune moment to introduce new evidence." Thorne shot up again. "What now? He has nothing. We've seen his disclosures. He has no proof. Objection. Relevance?" "The relevance, Mr. Thorne," David said, his voice gaining strength, "is that this new evidence speaks directly to the creation of your definitive Swiss report. We have evidence," he held up the manila envelope, "of a conspiracy to commit perjury." The room, which had been buzzing, went dead silent. Conspiracy. Perjury. Those were criminal words. Thorne's blood ran cold. His face, which had been red, was now a pasty, sick-looking white. He stared at the envelope. What was in it? "What is he talking about, Marcus?" Julian hissed. "He's bluffing," Thorne hissed back, but sweat was beading on his forehead. "Your Honor," Thorne stammered, This is theatre. The plaintiff's counsel is desperate. He's making wild, slanderous accusations. Whatever that is, it is undoubtedly stolen, privileged, and inadmissible." "Is it, Mr. Thorne?" Judge Hayes asked, her eyes narrowing. "Attorney-client privilege, you will recall, does not extend to the commission of a crime. Mr. Chen, you are making the most serious allegation an attorney can make. You had better be able to back it up." "It's all in here, Your Honor," David said, walking forward. The contents were provided by a whistleblower. A Mrs. Margaret Gable, former executive assistant to the Blackwood family for 30 years. Fired by Mr. Blackwood last year. Julian's head snapped up. Margaret? The old mousy woman? It couldn't be. "She provided," David continued, laying the envelope on the bailiff's desk, "what she calls her just-in-case file. I believe, Your Honor, you will find it illuminating. It contains Mr. Blackwood's real medical files, from his real doctor, and correspondence between Mr. Blackwood and Mr. Thorne. Regarding the Swiss solution, the last two words landed like a physical blow. Thorne actually staggered. He grabbed the table for support. He was done. His career was over. "Your Honor," he croaked. "Fruit of a poisonous tree. It's stolen property." "The tree, Mr. Thorne," Judge Hayes said, her voice filled with acid, "appears to be you. Bailiff, give me the envelope." Her chambers would have been the proper place, in private. But Judge Hayes knew, in her gut, that this was a public crime. The slander had been public. The lie had been public. The truth would be too. She put on her glasses. The entire courtroom, the press, the Harringtons. Elena, everyone watched as she unbent the metal clasp and opened the flap. She pulled out the first document. Her eyes scanned it. A single eyebrow rose. "Well, well," she said, loud enough for the court stenographer. "Alistair Finch, head of internal medicine at New York Presbyterian. A good man. I play bridge with his wife." She looked at Julian. "It seems, Mr. Blackwood, that Dr. Finch, your family doctor for 20 years, has a very different opinion of your health. According to this report, dated just 3 months before your alleged trip to Switzerland, your vitality is, and I quote, excellent. No indicators of infertility whatsoever. He notes you are, in fact, in prime condition." The gallery gasped. Victoria Harrington made a small, strangled sound. That's a forgery," Julian stammered, his mask of calm finally cracking. "It's a lie." "Is it, Mr. Blackwood?" the judge countered. "Or was Dr. Dubois the lie? Shall we get Dr. Finch on the phone? He's just across town." She didn't wait for an answer. She picked up the next sheaf of papers. "Ah, and here. The correspondence." Her face, which had been stern, darkened into a mask of pure cold fury. She read, her eyes moving quickly. "My God," she whispered. "Your Honor?" David prompted gently. Judge Hayes looked up, but she wasn't looking at David. She was looking at Marcus Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, you are an officer of this court, and you wrote this." She began to read aloud. "From Marcus Thorne to Julian Blackwood. The R problem." "The R problem? I assume that's Ms. Rodriguez?" Elena flinched, as if struck. "She has refused the offer. We will now move to the Swiss solution. I have contacted Dubois. He is flexible. The cost will be high, but it will be definitive." The judge looked up, her eyes blazing, and the reply, "From you, Mr. Blackwood. From Julian Blackwood. To Marcus Thorne. It's expensive." The room was so quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights was deafening. "Thorne to Blackwood," the judge continued. "It is cheaper than the alternative. The funds will be wired from the offshore research account. The file will be created. You just need to be sick for the week and stay off social media. Your polo match is a liability. We will use it as the date for your procedure." Elena finally understood. The arrogance, the coldness. It wasn't a lie born of passion or fear. It was a business transaction, a solution, an alternative. She and her children were a line item, an inconvenience to be managed. "So," Judge Hayes said, her voice dripping with contempt, "you didn't just lie, Mr. Blackwood. You commissioned it. You purchased perjury. You and Mr. Thorne invented a medical condition." She looked at Thorne. "Counselor, I suggest you stop being an attorney and find one. Immediately." Thorne sank into his chair. He put his head in his hands. It was over. "But still," the judge mused, "it seems so extreme. All this. The risk, the expense, the conspiracy, all to avoid child support? For a man of your means, it's excessive." She looked down at the last document in the file. "The thickest one." "Ah." Her voice was soft. "Now it all makes sense." She held up the 200-page document. A draft merger agreement. between Blackwood Properties and Harrington Logistics. In the front row, Arthur Harrington, who had been watching with a horrified fascination, sat bolt upright. "What?" "It seems, Mr. Harrington," the judge said, her eyes fixed on him, "you were about to get into business with a very complicated man." She flipped through the pages. "A $10 billion merger. Contingent, it seems." Her eyes went to Victoria. "On a marriage." Victoria blushed, but her eyes were wide with a dawning, sickening horror. "But there's always a clause, isn't there?" the judge said, almost to herself. "And the devil is always in the details." She found the page. Section 4B, the Family Values and Morality Clause. She read it, slowly, clearly, her voice echoing in the silent room. "The aforementioned merger will be rendered null and void if either primary signatory is found to have engaged in conduct that would bring moral or financial scandal upon the new entity." She paused, then continued. "This includes, but is not limited to, financial crimes, public scandal, or the revelation of unacknowledged heirs." She put the document down. The silence was absolute. It was the void. Julian Blackwood was no longer just a liar. He was a monster. He hadn't just denied his children. He had erased them. He had weighed his $10 billion deal against his 2 children, and the deal had won. Elena stared at him, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. This wasn't about her. It was never about her. She and her children were just a complication, a snag in a contract. Victoria Harrington was the first to move. She stood up. Her face, so perfect, was now a mask of white-hot rage, her blue eyes blazing. "Julian," she said, her voice a terrifying, trembling whisper. Arthur Harrington was on his feet beside her. You swore to me, boy. You swore your past was clean. You let my daughter, you let my name, be party to this filth." Julian stood, his hands raised, trying to placate them. "Arthur, Victoria, darling, this is not what it looks like. It's legal maneuvering. It's a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Victoria's voice was a shriek. "She just read the contract, you idiot. You knew. You sat here, beside me, and you let that man, that snake, call that poor woman a gold digger. You knew it was true all along. You have children." The word children came out of her mouth like poison, like a curse. "Victoria, please," Julian begged, his voice cracking, all pretense of power gone. "The deal. We can fix this." Whack! The sound of Victoria's hand cracking across Julian's face was so loud it echoed off the marble walls. The press gallery gasped as one. Julian's head snapped to the side, a brilliant red handprint blooming on his billion-dollar cheek. "The deal," Victoria hissed, her face inches from his, "is dead. You are finished, Julian. You are nothing." "You're done, Blackwood," Arthur Harrington roared, pulling his daughter, who was now sobbing with rage and humiliation, toward the aisle. "You're ruined. I'll see you in jail. You think this is a scandal? Wait until my lawyers are done with you. You didn't just lie to her. You committed fraud against me." He and Victoria stormed out of the courtroom, the doors slamming behind them, the sound of their empire collapsing. The press went insane. Photographers were standing on benches, flashes turning the room into a strobe-lit nightmare. "Order!" Judge Hayes roared, banging her gavel. "Order! Order in this courtroom! Bailiff, remove anyone who cannot be silent!" The room, slowly, painfully, settled. Julian Blackwood was left standing alone at his table. Marcus Thorne had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Julian looked small, a shell, the power, the arrogance, the aura. It had all been sucked out of him, leaving just a pale, frightened man with a red mark on his face. Judge Hayes looked at Elena. "Ms. Rodriguez, please rise." Elena stood, her legs trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Ms. Rodriguez," the judge said, her voice softening for the first time, "you have endured a campaign of slander, harassment, and profound cruelty. You have been called a liar, a harlot, and a gold digger, and you have done so with a dignity this court, and I, rarely see. You were not a gold digger. You were not a schemer. You were a mother, and you were telling the truth." The judge then turned her gaze, now so cold it could freeze fire, on Julian Blackwood. "Mr. Julian Blackwood, you are a man who has everything. Money, power, privilege, and you used all of it to crush a woman who had nothing. You used it to deny your own children. Not for shame, not for love, not for any human reason, but for a morality clause. You put a price on your children's heads, and that price was $10 billion. I find your actions to be not just illegal, but unconscionable. They are a stain on this court, on this city, and on the very concept of fatherhood." She picked up her gavel. "Therefore, this court issues the following judgments, effective immediately. 1. Paternity is established, retroactively to birth, for Leo and Maya Rodriguez. Their birth certificates will be amended, and their names, should you choose, Ms. Rodriguez, can be changed to Blackwood." "I'll keep my name," Elena said, her voice shaking but clear. "As you wish," the judge nodded. 2. Sole legal and physical custody is awarded to the plaintiff, Ms. Elena Rodriguez. Mr. Blackwood's visitation rights are suspended indefinitely, pending a full psychological evaluation. 3. I am ordering a full and complete unsealing of all of Mr. Blackwood's personal, corporate, domestic, and offshore financial records for the purpose of child support. But in the meantime," she paused, her eyes glittering, "for the pain, the suffering, the slander, and the sheer, calculated malice of your conspiracy, this court awards Ms. Rodriguez punitive damages, backdated to the children's birth. I am awarding her a lump sum payment of $30 million. A new, shocked silence. Thorne's head snapped up. "Your Honor, that's—" "I'm not finished, Mr. Thorne," the judge snapped. 4. I am signing an immediate order to freeze all of Mr. Blackwood's known personal assets and place a lien on Blackwood properties, pending this payment and the full child support review. You will not move $1, Mr. Blackwood. And finally, Mr. Thorne, Dr. Armand Dubois. And you, Mr. Blackwood, you came into my courtroom. You swore an oath on a Bible, and you lied. You conspired to commit perjury. You fabricated evidence. You committed fraud upon this court. I'm referring this entire case, including the manila envelope, the Swiss report, the merger agreement, and the full transcript of these proceedings, to the District Attorney's Office on charges of felony perjury, conspiracy to commit fraud, and fabrication of evidence. I strongly suspect the words criminal indictment will be in your very near future. She looked at the bailiff. Mr. Blackwood will remain in this courtroom. He will be remanded to the custody of the court-martials. Given the merger agreement, he now has access to nothing. He is a clear and present flight risk. Julian Blackwood, the titan of industry, simply slumped into his chair. Not just defeated. Erased. For Ms. Rodriguez, the judge said, her voice ringing, and for her children, justice has been served. She banged her gavel, the sound final as a coffin nail. This court is adjourned. The room exploded. David Chen pulled Elena into a hug, and for the first time, he was the one crying. We did it, Elena. We did it. Elena just stood there, her body shaking as the press swarmed them. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked, one last time, across the room at the man who had tried to destroy her. He was being spoken to by a bailiff, his billion-dollar suit now looking like a prison uniform. He was pale, small, and for the first time, he looked exactly like what he was. A broken, empty man. Elena Rodriguez turned her back on him. She took David's arm and, without a word, she walked out of the courtroom to go home to her children. The downfall was total. The Harrington deal didn't just collapse. It triggered a cascade of financial ruin for Blackwood Properties. Julian Blackwood was arrested on the courthouse steps for perjury. His lawyer, Marcus Thorne, was disbarred, and the Clinique La Vigne was shut down pending a fraud investigation. But this story isn't about him. It's about Elena. With the settlement, she didn't buy a penthouse. She set up the Leo and Maya Fund, a legal aid foundation for parents fighting for their children. She finally bought a small house with a yard, and, for the first time in her life, a studio where she could paint. She gave her children the one thing Julian Blackwood never had: a life built on truth. What did you think of Elena's story? Her fight shows that the truth is the most powerful weapon, even when you're facing a billionaire. Do you think the judge gave Julian the justice he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We tell stories like this every week, stories of betrayal, justice, and the powerful getting what's coming to them. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see that the little guy can win, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Click the bell so you never miss a single story.